What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fresh Finance Podcast. My name is Thomas Elms. I've got my co-host here, Kyle Ryan, and today we are going to talk about the realities of retiring early. And we kind of want to cover the full scope of retiring early and both the benefits and the opportunities, but also the cons and some of the possible downfalls, or even just some of the things that a lot of people don't really talk about too often. And Kyle, I know that you and I have talked about this conversation, this topic in a lot of detail offline. I think it's becoming something much more popular here in the last 10 to 15 years. I think primarily in the fact that there's just so many more opportunities to make vast sums of money that allow you to retire early. It's not really been the historical norm. You know, if we go back to the 1900s, it was kind of you retired at 65 and, got your social security and lasted, 5, 10, 15 years. And, not to be too, morbid on that conversation, but just today with longer lifespans, longer life expectancy, and people just having opportunities to make more money, this has become a more relevant piece of the conversation when it comes to financial planning. And I think it really should be addressed on both the pros and cons from a reality perspective. And I'd love to just kind of get your off the cuff take on the conversation and some of the things you want to talk about today.
Yeah, it's a topic that comes up pretty often. Who wouldn't want to retire early? We all look at work as a means to an end. I love what I do. You love what you do. I'm sure plenty of listeners love what they do, but we don't wake up early in the morning every morning because we want to. It's because at the end of the day, we really have to. So early retirement's always an interesting and exciting topic of discussion, but there's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of reasons why people can't retire early. We all want to, but not all of us can. So first and foremost, the thing that I always talk about, the most important thing to retirement, regular retirement or early retirement, is how much is it going to cost you to retire? How much does it cost you to live on a monthly basis, on an annual basis? If you don't know that, you're kind of just you're trying to fly blind. And usually we don't advise that. We always say, you don't plan to fail. Some people just happen to fail to plan, and that would be failing to plan. Not understanding your expenses going into retirement can be very dangerous. So that's something that we always try and emphasize is understand your monthly or annual expenses, understand your cost of living. That's always the first place to iron out, because it's easy to know, my savings account doesn't go down. I know how much I make, but I don't know how much I spend. Well, at some point you really have to iron that down and get a good idea of it.
Yeah. And I think honestly, it was a blessing and a curse that we've seen inflation go up so much. But I think this was a very good kind of where we were at last year, where we're still at this year. But these past couple of years have been a very good, a real life example of how it feels for the cost of goods to go up when it hurts your checking account. It hurts your spending. And it's also the reality of long-term retirement. Because we're looking, if you retire at kind of the quote unquote full retirement age is 67. I mean, female average life expectancy is 85. You're looking at 20 plus years of, retirement. And, if you think about retiring earlier than that, maybe 55, 50, depending on your situation, maybe even earlier, you're doubling that amount of time that inflation has to come into play and your monthly expenses. Also, any sort of large capital expenditures. I think I was actually in a meeting here earlier today. We were talking about this with a prospective client, is the reality of costs that are kind of one-time lump sum purchases like vehicles. If you're trying to, purchase any sort of retirement luxuries like a boat or an additional home, these things are increasing in value dramatically. And if you don't take that into account in your financial plan, especially if you're trying to retire early, that could really massively deplete your lump sum assets in a way that you weren't necessarily thinking about.
And one of the best ways to prevent yourself from spending money is to be working. I mean, think about how often do you have the opportunity to spend money while you're at work other than getting lunch or something? But all of a sudden you have the whole day to yourself and you're like, what should I go do? I'll go to the mall, I'll go spending or something. A good way to prevent yourself from spending money is to not give yourself time to spend the money, as odd as it is. So I see all the time clients will retire, say my cost of living is XYZ, and the next thing you know, it's 20, 30% higher because, oh, well, I have more time to be with my kids. I want to bring them out to dinner. Oh, I want to go out and take my grandkids out to vacation. And perfectly good reasons. Don't get me wrong. It's just, you have to be able to expect it. You have to be able to budget for that. And that's one of the huge other points, we'll talk about one-off expenses. I'm glad you brought that up. Can be medical insurance, right? You're getting to a point where you're aging. You could be going to the doctor more often. You might have to get hospitalized, huge medical bills. You mentioned the difference between early 2000s, 20th century versus now. The cost of medical insurance. People are living longer, and it costs a lot more to live longer because you have more medical needs. So medical insurance is a huge, huge consideration when you retire early. If you have a
Yeah.
job through an employer, your health insurance is partially covered by your employer. All of a sudden, you have to go out and get private insurance. The cost of your insurance could potentially double, triple, depending on what you have at work. So that is another huge consideration to make if you plan on retiring early, is what's going to be the cost of going out to the marketplace and getting your own private coverage versus what you currently pay today.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And this kind of like rehashes out the idea of having a well-funded HSA as well. If you have the opportunity to do that, this is a great component to that. But it really is an important topic, and really, especially if you're planning on retiring early, thinking about your family as well. Because you're not only thinking about the cost to insure yourself, you're thinking about the cost to insure your spouse and any, dependent children that you have. And
yeah,
depending on how early you have children or how early you plan on retiring, that could definitely come into play where health insurance costs go through the roof. And kind of transitioning, one of the things from an investment perspective that you need to think about is the traditional 4% rule. That kind of came into play, and to just kind of walk through that a little bit, essentially this is a rule where if you withdraw 4% of your investment assets and achieve a specified rate of return, you'll be able to, quote unquote, outlive your retirement assets. But in reality, the study actually found it would last for about 33 years. Now, here's the thing: past performance doesn't guarantee, future results. And there are situations where that rule absolutely does not apply. But at the same time, you can't really use it if you're planning on retiring much earlier than the slated time horizon of that strategy. So, sometimes you need to take a look at 3% withdrawal rates, maybe even 2% withdrawal rates. For my athletes, their careers typically span no later than age 35, at least in their sport specific career. So we look at a 1% withdrawal rate. Now, are their incomes, top one of 1%? Absolutely. But they also live larger lifestyles on average than most people. And so kind of re-navigating the idea of how much you have the ability to withdraw out of your investment accounts is really important. And I'd love to also kind of get your take on that, and then transition over to, diversifying out your tax location of your investment accounts as well. Kind of what your take on that is.
yeah, I mean, the thought process is, if you have $1 million and you can reasonably expect at least a 4% rate of return, you can take out 40 grand and live on it, right? This year,
Yep.
you can get a T-bill at 5%, so you can reasonably use that. If you do that at 40, it's different than doing it if you have $1 million at age 40 versus age 60. You might have 3 million. Then 4% of 3 million is 120,000. So yes, depending on where you are in your life, how much money you have, you really have to adjust that number. And that's for taking income from that 4% rule. Now, in terms of diversification of investment accounts, I think this is really important. Because we all know you can have a 401k, you can have an IRA, you can have a Roth, you can have a taxable individual or joint account. And in my opinion, it's really important to have, depending on your circumstances, each of them. Because once you're in retirement, say you retire at age 50, you can't touch, depending on certain rules, you can't touch your IRA, your 401k without hitting a 10% early withdrawal penalty. Think that'll throw a wrench in your gears. You take out 100 grand, you're giving an extra 10 to taxes for a penalty.
Yep.
So by having a taxable brokerage account available, you can withdraw from that tax-free. You pay taxes on any gains in there, but we've covered that in past episodes. It's much more liquid from a tax perspective. And you also want a Roth, because say you take out a bunch of money from your IRA, you're 60, there's no withdrawal penalty. You take out a bunch of money from your IRA, but all of a sudden you're getting up to that next tax bracket, you need more money. You can go to the Roth, you can go to the individual brokerage account, and you won't inquire more taxes, which at the end of the day, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep, right? So taxes are another cliche for you, 2 in a row, ready? Those who know the rules of the game tend to play it better, and knowing how your taxable situation is and how it can best work for you is, especially with early retirement, vastly important. It can make or break your early retirement.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation where if you don't know the rules of the game, having that power of delegation and finding somebody that really knows the rules of the game to help you navigate that situation is really important as well. And kind of on the 401k side, the retirement side, would you just like real quick talk about 72T, the
Yes.
idea of substantially equal payments, and I'd love to just kind of talk through that planning process as well, because what a lot of people think is like, oh, I have $1 million in my 401k account and I'm 50, like I should be fine. Well,
What's that?
reality is, unless you're doing something like 72T, you're going to incur that penalty. And this strategy is kind of a nice little workaround to a degree on how you can navigate an early retirement.
Yes. So the rule with retirement is that, if you have a retirement account, a qualified retirement account, which typically will be a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, 401k, you can't touch that money. It's meant for your retirement. So the government will penalize you if you take it out currently before age 59 and a half. All right. So there's some exceptions to that rule. If you have an IRA, you can use, as Thomas referred to, as a rule called 72T, in which you can take out, based on your age, annual distributions that they'll give you a set amount based on your age. It'll be different at age 56 versus 57, so on and so forth. They'll give you a set amount that you could take out without incurring that 10% penalty. It's another really valuable tool for someone who's retiring early to be able to get money out of a retirement account when they otherwise wouldn't be able to without penalty, and allow them to use it for their cost of living. Similarly to an IRA, not to get too many, complex words out there, an IRA can use 72T. A 401k has a special rule where when you terminate from employment, you leave an employer and your 401k is there. If you are at age 50, 55 or older, you can actually take money out of there due to your termination from employment as much as you want, and you will not get penalized. So what have we done in the past? I thought this was incredible. What have we heard clients do in the past is you'll have a client retire, say age 57 or something. They have a $500,000 401k. You take 300,000, you roll over some money to an IRA. Say you roll $300,000 to an IRA, you have $200,000 left in your 401k. We've done that in the past because if a client needed money out of one of their IRA, they're going to get penalized on it unless they do 72T, which only allows a set amount of money.
Yeah.
We left some money in the 401k because if they ever had a one-time expense and they needed money, we can always go back to that 401k, use the rule related to the termination of employment, and then get as much as they need out without a penalty. You'll still be taxed. You won't be penalized, which is a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of a good distinction is as you're navigating the situation yourself, working with an advisor, you kind of want to have that conversation. Hey, if this is one of these two strategies or something that I'm considering, are we looking at utilizing something where maybe we just need to fix sum of money each year for the next, let's just call it 10 years,
Yep.
then you have the ability to do the 72T. But if you're in a situation where maybe you're looking at selling your home and purchasing a new one, or, and maybe you need a little bit extra down, you just kind of need a lump sum, then taking a look at that option within a 401k to take, that distribution between age 55 and, 59, that's always a good option as well.
Because what do you not want to do, Thomas, if you retire early? You don't want to unretire, right? We were speaking offline about this. There is such thing as age-based discrimination in the workforce. There's not supposed to be, but it's hard to deny there is. You retire early at age 50 in your 50s or something, and a couple years later, you spent a little too much, you might have to go back at it. You might not be able to get as paid as highly as you once were. Now you might be working harder for less income. So it's just really important to know that you're financially, emotionally, mentally prepared to retire early. You can always get part-time work. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just understanding you might not be able to get what you once had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also kind of wanted to talk about some positive strategies, especially for somebody who retires early. Kind of that ordinary income stream goes away is the concept of doing Roth conversions to try
Yes.
and create more tax-free monies, in later retirement years. And, I think that's something that you and I always talk about, is something that we navigate with clients often, is looking at if a specific situation presents itself where a Roth conversion could be good for you. Right now, Roth conversions are not good for everybody all the time. But looking at if you have a situation where conversions could be good for you, and the way that I kind of talk about conversions is kind of utilizing a riding the train analogy. And what I mean by that is, let's say there's two trains that are kind of on the same path. And essentially what you're doing is, you're hopping on the traditional, the pre-tax train first. You're getting that tax deduction up front because your income is probably pretty high and you want that tax deduction. And then once you retire, that income is now gone. And you're essentially now, depending on certain circumstances, but you're in a place where your tax bracket is lower. So what you do then is you do the conversion, you jump on the other train where you convert that money over to the tax-free side. Now you have to pay taxes on that conversion, but the benefit is you're in a lower tax bracket at that point in time of retirement than you were when you were actively in the workplace. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds if you do it in the correct way.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. We really, if someone's retiring early, their W-2 income stops, we really target that time period between when their W-2 income stops and their Social Security begins or their Medicare begins, because we'll find clients are in much higher tax brackets than they believe themselves to be, sometimes accountants too. Once they're in Social Security, once they're in Medicare, you can begin really phasing yourselves into much higher tax brackets. But you're absolutely right. Once that W-2 income stops, if you're not getting Social Security, you're not worried about IRMA for Medicare, that's the time that could very easily be the time to do some massive Roth IRA conversions, where you're filling up the tax brackets up to whatever is most beneficial for you.
Yeah,
So that's a
absolutely.
really good point. One other thing that I think is really positive to people in this situation is it goes back to knowing your cost of living. Because if you know that you're going to spend $6,000 a month, you also know you need to make $6,000 a month, right? So one way to do that could be passive income. Feel free to check out an episode we've done in the past on passive income, but there's a lot of different avenues that you can have to create passive income. It could be dividends from specific investments. It could be a rental property paying you, royalties from whatever you own. It could be so many different things, but passive income, more often than not, has been a significant source of revenue for those of my clients who have retired early.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the passive income side, one of the things that you and I have talked about before is really making sure that you have a good buildup of emergency cash reserves if you're
Yes.
planning on retiring early, because one of the worst things that you want to see is somebody who retires early with passive income that has the opportunity to be very capitally intensive. Rental real estate is normally a big ticket item in that concern. And the last thing that you want to do is build up a rental real estate portfolio and then retire from your active income job. And then things go wrong and you have to plunge in a bunch of capital that depletes your nest egg. And then you're kind of in some troubled waters.
Yeah.
So really having good cash reserves is important. There was something else that I really wanted to bring up. That you were talking about here a minute ago. I can't remember. Is there anything else that you
Yeah.
were thinking about so I can try and remember this?
Yeah, so it's not exactly on the same spot. I'm glad you mentioned the emergency reserve, but we kind of touched on it. Is like understand your change in spending habits too, right? You retire early, you're gonna have more time to spend with your kids, potentially your grandkids. So understand your spending habits are change. Your values are very likely going to change. If you become a grandparent, you might want to spend more time traveling. You might want to be very altruistic and gift your grandkids things. Maybe you're thinking about paying for their college. Who knows what it is? But just be very cognizant of the changing of your spending habits as well as the values that you hold as an individual, as a family, right? Understand with your spouse, if you're single, if you're with a spouse, be on the same page with each other, right? I've had situations where I've heard of people retiring early and their spouse doesn't, because they feel one way or the other, they just continue to like to work. But if you don't agree on where you're at, where you're both retired, one of you's working, you're both happy about it, I've seen that cause a lot of distance in a relationship. And without being very communicative with your loved one, that very easily can happen. So that's another thing I wanted to bring up too.
Yeah, and actually I appreciate you bringing that up because it made me remember what I was going to say is you also want to try and adopt a I would call it a fiscal responsibility of, when markets are good and accounts are going up, your spending can be what it's feasible to be. But when markets are down like last year, in 2022, you need to have that ability to get a little bit more frugal with your spending, because especially on a longer time horizon of retirement, you do need to ride those ebbs and flows, those ups and downs, of the wave of the stock market. And because if you don't, that spending in bad markets is going to just weigh so much more on your portfolios. Is just, the thing about it is you almost have to treat it like you're actively working. When everything is going well, you have the ability to live a little bit bigger than maybe the median. But when things are going wrong, I wouldn't say wrong, but are going bad, you need to have that restraint and have that frugalness a part of you. Because if you don't, in bad markets with a long retirement time horizon, it can definitely eat away at your kind of your nest egg.
That's why whenever we run financial plans and we benchmark, we don't have to beat the market. We have to beat your financial plan. You need to make X, Y, and Z in order to fund your cost of living stuff. The market isn't a continuous tick up. It's not just a nice joyride where you're just getting steady returns. There are bad years. We just saw it, right?
Yep.
So that's a really good point. One of the last things I wanted to add was tax strategies, again, is just so important. I think one of the most important things to this is utilizing really good tax strategies, understanding from the age that you retire to when you begin collecting Social Security what you ought to be doing. You can really start filling up the tax brackets with Roth IRA conversions or something there. Then you have the time with which you're taking Social Security, you're taking Medicare, then all of a sudden you're 73 now and you're taking RMDs. Just make sure you're giving the government as little as possible. No, wait, let me make sure you're tax planning in a legal way to give the government as little as possible. And no gray area here, but it's very important. Don't let the government be your primary beneficiary. Know what works for you. Know a good tax strategy. Work with a financial advisor. Work with an accountant, and it could have a huge difference. I look down. I have two more things to realize, but want to give you an opportunity if you have anything.
No, you're good. I was going to say it's avoidance, not evasion, right?
Yes.
That's the big component there.
Yes.
And for me, the one thing that I was going to say is, from a business owner perspective, if you're looking at exiting, selling a business, things of that nature, try and find a way to create a revenue stream that you can monetize based off your experience and your wisdom in that field. I have a client right now that's got a 10-year plan, where he's planning on retiring in 10 years. And he's actually building out an internal course, but also a website program that he can utilize to sell to people that could be clients if he wasn't retired. And he's trying to kind of monetize the experience and the wisdom that he has, even though he's going to exit the business and retire. Trying to find ways, if your business isn't technically sellable, where maybe it's your expertise in the consultation is what has created the value and the income generation of your practice. Trying to find a way that you can exit the business with a windfall lump sum payment if possible, but also trying to find a way to create any sort of recurring revenue through that experience that you can.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that was one of the things I wanted to mention. And your business doesn't get sold the last day you retire, right? You don't just wait until you're ready to retire and then say, all right, who wants it? Everyone line up, right? It unfortunately doesn't work like that. So if you plan on selling your business to a third party, whoever it is, make sure that plan ought to be in place years and years in advance. It requires a lot of attorneys, accountants, bankers, advisors, the whole nine yards to make sure it's done correctly, adequately. I don't think two parties are ever happy in an agreement, but hopefully as happy as possible. And especially if you're going to sell it if it's a family owned business, there are 1,000,001 different strategies you can use to not only pay as little as taxes in your own life, maximize the value of your business to yourself, but also help out the people, your family members, whoever it is that are purchasing the business from you. That gets into estate planning, tax planning, retirement planning. So there's a lot that goes on there for business owners, especially when planning on retirement or the selling of their business. And the same sort of conversation would be life insurance planning, especially as a business owner. You need to have some adequate life insurance planning in there. But everyone, if you're getting ready for early retirement, it depends what your life insurance is doing for you. Is it a replacement of income? Maybe you don't have that much income to replace. You can look at decreasing your insurance needs in some areas, but you might need to increase them in other areas. If you can't afford to self-insure long-term care coverage, if you can't afford to self-insure things, maybe you get some insurance to help afford that. So that's the last piece I wanted to add, was make sure that your assurance is adequate. Do another review of it, especially if you're retiring early.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think kind of the crux of this episode is most people want to retire as early as they can, but the reality is there's a lot more than meets the eye for early retirement. There's a lot more considerations that you have to take into play. Not saying that it's completely out of the picture, but if you save diligently and you plan correctly, there's a really good opportunity that that's a possibility, right? And just kind of re-engages the idea that it really is important to work with financial planners like us, who have the capability to provide the strategies or the planning necessary in order to get you to a place there. But also, it's back to the original idea in one of our first episodes of this year is why it's important to plan early. Because if you're trying to retire early, you need to start planning early as you possibly can, in order to create the accounts, the processes, and the strategies to actually get you there. So I think that's kind of the crux of this whole episode.
Absolutely. Last thing I'd say is I love early retirement. I hate late unretirement.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you to everybody watching, listening, do a little bit of both. Please make sure you're following us on LinkedIn. If you're watching us on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, please make sure and subscribe. Leave us some comments if you have anything that you'd like us to cover, and can't wait for the next episode. Thanks, Kyle.
Yep.